Most people believed Russia had found a perfect loophole, a silent fleet of oil tankers, slipping through global waters, ignoring sanctions, moving billions of dollars without consequence. No navy would touch them. No missiles would chase them. No drones would ever reach them. For years, these ships moved freely, feeding Russia's war machine while the world watched and protested. But on one night in December, that illusion shattered. A Russian oil tanker sailing calmly through the Mediterranean Sea suddenly became a burning message. A message that said nowhere is safe anymore. Welcome to Global Focus, where today we reveal how Ukraine just crossed a line no one thought possible, striking Russia's shadow fleet more than 1,200 miles from home and rewriting the rules of modern warfare. When Russia first built its shadow fleet, confidence was the foundation of the strategy. These weren't warships. They were commercial tankers flying foreign flags, registered in distant countries, insured through shell companies, and crewed by sailors who rarely asked questions. Moscow assumed that Western nations would complain but never act, fearing escalation or legal consequences. And Ukraine, with its limited navy, was dismissed entirely as a threat at sea. For a long time, that assumption seemed correct. The shadow fleet grew larger, bolder, and more profitable, quietly exporting millions of barrels of oil every single day while sanctions became little more than paperwork. But war changes countries, and Ukraine has evolved faster than anyone expected. What began as a defensive fight for survival has transformed into a global campaign targeting the financial arteries that keep Russia's invasion alive. Instead of chasing Russian tanks across fields, Ukraine is now hunting oil money across oceans. And the strike on the tanker known as QENDIL-2 proves just how far that evolution has gone. On December 19, reports emerged that a Russian-linked tanker had been struck in neutral Mediterranean waters. This wasn't a port attack. This wasn't near Ukraine. This was thousands of kilometers away, deep into what Russia believed was a safe zone. The ship, QENDIL-2, was no ordinary tanker. It was a known part of Russia's shadow fleet, already sanctioned by both the European Union and the United Kingdom. It sailed under the flag of Oman, a common disguise used to mask Russian ownership and evade scrutiny. On paper, it looked innocent. In reality, it was moving the money that fuels missiles, drones, and destruction. The journey of QENDIL-2 tells its own story. It departed from Novorossiysk in early November, passed through the Bosphorus Strait, entered the Mediterranean, crossed the Suez Canal, and reached India's Jamnagar port. There, it unloaded its cargo before beginning its return journey. After leaving India, the tanker appeared to head toward Gibraltar, a routine route that raised no alarms. But then something strange happened. Late at night, the ship made a sudden U-turn in the Mediterranean, changing course toward the eastern sea lanes. This kind of maneuver is a classic shadow fleet tactic, designed to confuse trackers and hide true destinations. Not long after that turn, Ukraine struck. The attack was precise, coordinated, and devastating. Multiple drones hit the tanker, triggering explosions that left it disabled beyond use. Video footage later released shows drones circling the ship from above, capturing the moment of impact from multiple angles. This wasn't a single lucky hit. It was a deliberate operation designed to ensure the ship would never sail again. The most shocking part wasn't just the damage. It was the distance. Ukraine had carried out a successful naval strike more than 2,000 kilometers from its territory. This immediately raised one question that stunned military analysts worldwide. How did Ukraine do it? The answer appears to lie in a new chapter of drone warfare. Rather than relying on long-range missiles or traditional naval assets, Ukraine likely used short-range hexacopter drones launched from close proximity. This suggests that Ukrainian operatives may have deployed from a small civilian vessel, blending into commercial traffic before releasing drones within striking distance. If true, it means Ukraine now has the capability to conduct covert maritime operations almost anywhere on the globe. And this changes everything. For Russia, the shadow fleet was supposed to be untouchable. These ships are not armed. They are not escorted by warships. Protecting them openly would expose Russia's involvement and trigger diplomatic crises. But leaving them unprotected now means accepting that any tanker, at any time, could suddenly become a target. The strike on QENDIL-2 wasn't just about destroying one ship. It was about destroying a belief. Questions quickly followed about legality and morality. Was Ukraine justified in attacking a commercial tanker in international waters? Ukrainian security sources argue that the answer is clear. The ship was sanctioned, actively helping Russia evade international law, and generating revenue directly tied to the war. From Ukraine's perspective, that makes it a legitimate military target. Concerns about environmental damage were also addressed. Intelligence suggested the tanker was empty at the time of the strike, minimizing the risk of an oil spill in the Mediterranean. But the real impact of the attack goes far beyond legal debates. It sends a warning to every ship in Russia's shadow fleet. There are no longer safe routes. There are no guaranteed corridors. Every journey now carries risk. And when ships become liabilities instead of assets, the entire system begins to crack. What makes this even more significant is that the Mediterranean strike did not happen in isolation. While Qendil-2 was burning at sea, Ukraine was already executing other operations designed to choke Russia's energy economy. And that brings us to the next phase of this story, where Ukraine expanded its reach even further into another critical region. While the world was still trying to process how Ukraine managed to strike a Russian tanker in the Mediterranean, another operation was already unfolding far to the east. Almost simultaneously with the attack on Qendil-2, Ukraine opened a second front at sea, this time in the Caspian. This wasn't a coincidence, it was coordination, and it revealed that Ukraine's strategy is no longer reactive or regional. It is deliberate, synchronized, and global in reach. On December 20th, reports confirmed that Ukraine's Special Operations Forces had launched drone strikes against Russian targets in the Caspian Sea. Unlike the Mediterranean operation, this attack was claimed openly. Ukrainian drones struck a Russian patrol vessel and an offshore oil platform tied directly to one of Russia's largest energy companies. The timing was surgical. While one arm of Ukraine's security apparatus crippled a shadow fleet tanker thousands of kilometers away, another arm was degrading Russia's energy production closer to home. The message was unmistakable. Ukraine is no longer choosing between targets. It is hitting all of them. The patrol vessel that was destroyed was not symbolic. It was a Project 22460 Rubin-class ship, designed specifically for maritime security and protection of strategic assets. Its purpose was to guard the very infrastructure Ukraine targeted. On that night, it failed. The destruction of the ship exposed a hard truth for Moscow. Even assets meant to secure Russian energy flows are now vulnerable to drones that cost a fraction of what those ships are worth. But the patrol vessel was only part of the strike. The primary target was the Filanovsky oil and gas platform in the Caspian Sea, operated by Lukoil. This platform sits above enormous reserves of oil and natural gas, feeding both domestic supply and export markets. The revenue generated here doesn't just support Russia's economy. It directly fills the budget that funds the war in Ukraine. By hitting this platform, Ukraine wasn't just damaging infrastructure. It was attacking the bloodstream of Russia's military financing. Lukoil is not a minor player. It is one of the largest energy companies in the world and the second largest in Russia. Its operations span continents, and its profits reach into the tens of billions. In a single year, Lukoil reported revenues exceeding $100 billion. Even after taxes and declining profit margins, the sums flowing into the Kremlin remain enormous. Ukraine understands this reality clearly. Tanks, missiles, and drones don't appear from nowhere. They are paid for with oil money. Every platform destroyed, every shipment delayed, every tanker disabled reduces Russia's ability to wage war. What makes the Caspian strike especially important is that it wasn't the first. It was the fourth confirmed Ukrainian attack on energy infrastructure in that region. This shows a sustained campaign rather than a one-time message. Ukraine is methodically testing Russian defenses, identifying weaknesses, and exploiting them. The Caspian Sea was once considered a protected zone, far removed from the battlefield in Ukraine. That assumption no longer holds. Together, the Mediterranean tanker strike and the Caspian Sea attacks reveal a clear pattern. Ukraine is systematically dismantling Russia's energy export system from production to transportation. First came refinery strikes inside Russia. Then port facilities. Now tankers at sea and offshore platforms. This is not escalation for shock value. It is escalation with purpose. The Shadow Fleet sits at the center of this strategy. These vessels move an estimated 65% of Russia's seaborne oil exports, amounting to millions of barrels per day. Financially, this translates into tens of billions of dollars each year. Without the Shadow Fleet, Russia cannot easily sell its oil. Without oil sales, the war becomes unsustainable. Ukraine doesn't need to sink every tanker. It only needs to make operating them dangerous enough that costs rise, insurance disappears, routes slow, and confidence collapses. That collapse has already begun. Shipowners are growing nervous. Crews are increasingly reluctant. Insurance companies are reassessing risks. Every successful strike compounds the fear. A tanker leaving port today carries more than oil. It carries uncertainty. It carries the possibility that somewhere along its route, unseen drones may already be watching. Russia's response options are limited. Escorting tankers with warships would expose the Shadow Fleet as an extension of the Russian military, triggering diplomatic backlash and potentially legitimizing further attacks. Arming the tankers themselves would do the same. Doing nothing, however, leaves them vulnerable. Moscow is trapped by its own secrecy. There are signs that Russia is already scrambling. Reports indicate that Russian military personnel have been spotted aboard some Shadow Fleet vessels, likely tasked with protection. But without openly deploying weapons, their presence changes little. Drones don't negotiate, they don't hesitate, and they don't care who is watching. What Ukraine has achieved here goes beyond physical damage. It has shattered psychological security. The belief that distance equals safety is gone. The belief that international waters provide immunity is gone. The belief that Ukraine's reach has limits is gone. And this brings us to the most dangerous question of all. If Ukraine can strike tankers in the Mediterranean and platforms in the Caspian, what comes next? How far is Kyiv willing to go? And how much pressure can Russia's energy system withstand before it begins to break in ways that cannot be repaired? Those answers lie in the Shadow Fleet itself, its scale, its weaknesses, and why Ukraine believes targeting it could ultimately decide the war. To understand why Ukraine is betting so heavily on attacks like the one against Qendil-2, you need to understand just how massive and fragile Russia's Shadow Fleet really is. On paper, it looks unstoppable. Estimates suggest the fleet may include up to 1,200 vessels, many of them aging tankers purchased quietly through intermediaries after Western companies cut ties with Russia. These ships operate in legal gray zones, switching flags, altering ownership records, and manipulating tracking data to stay one step ahead of regulators. For Moscow, this fleet became the ultimate workaround, a floating solution to sanctions that were supposed to cripple its oil exports. But size doesn't equal strength. In fact, the Shadow Fleet's greatest advantage is also its biggest weakness. Because these ships rely on secrecy, deception, and plausible deniability, they cannot be openly protected. They don't sail with visible military escorts. They don't carry advanced defensive systems. Many are poorly maintained, underinsured, and crewed by people who never signed up to be part of a war. Ukraine has recognized this imbalance and is exploiting it with ruthless efficiency. Financially, the Shadow Fleet is everything to Russia. Analysts estimate it moves around 3.7 million barrels of oil per day, accounting for roughly 65% of Russia's seaborne exports. That oil generates somewhere between $87 and $100 billion per year. Even after discounts and increased logistics costs, the Kremlin still taxes this revenue heavily. That tax money directly funds weapons production, troop salaries, drone manufacturing, and missile strikes. In simple terms, oil keeps the war alive. Ukraine doesn't need to destroy Russia's entire energy sector to change the outcome of the conflict. It only needs to disrupt it enough to create uncertainty, delays, and rising costs. Every disabled tanker tightens the pressure. Every strike forces Russia to reroute ships, pay higher insurance premiums, or accept longer delivery times. Over time, those inefficiencies compound. Buyers hesitate, middlemen demand deeper discounts, profits shrink, and when profits shrink, so does Moscow's ability to sustain a long war. This is why the Mediterranean strike was such a turning point. Until now, most Shadow Fleet attacks occurred closer to Russia's borders or within regions directly connected to the battlefield. The Qendil-2 attack proved that geography no longer offers protection. The sea lanes connecting Asia, the Middle East, and Europe are now contested spaces. That reality forces Russia to rethink every shipment, every route, and every assumption it has made since the war began. There's also a psychological dimension that cannot be ignored. The Shadow Fleet depends on the belief that nothing will happen. Crews board these ships assuming they are untouchable. Owners assume losses are unlikely. That confidence is now gone. When sailors see footage of drones striking tankers in international waters, fear spreads quickly. When insurers see those same videos, premiums rise or coverage disappears entirely. When ports hear whispers of targeted ships, inspections increase and delays multiply. Ukraine understands that fear travels faster than drones ever could. Russia has attempted to adapt, but every adaptation carries risks. Increasing secrecy only makes logistics more complex. Embedding military personnel aboard civilian tankers blurs legal lines and invites escalation. Escorting ships openly would expose the shadow fleet for what it is, undermining the entire premise of deniability. Moscow is forced to choose between protection and concealment, and neither option offers a clean solution. Meanwhile, Ukraine's learning curve is accelerating. Each successful strike provides data. Each operation reveals new vulnerabilities. The use of short-range drones launched from covert platforms suggests a flexible model that can be replicated in multiple regions. Unlike missiles, drones are relatively cheap, expendable, and adaptable. Losing one doesn't end an operation. It simply becomes part of the cost. For Ukraine, this asymmetry is powerful. It can force Russia to defend billion-dollar assets with systems that cost far more than the weapons used to attack them. What makes this strategy especially dangerous for Russia is its scalability. Ukraine doesn't need constant attacks everywhere. Sporadic, unpredictable strikes are enough. The uncertainty alone disrupts planning. A tanker delayed by a week can miss contracts. A delayed shipment can trigger penalties. A single disabled ship can block port schedules. Over time, the friction adds up, slowly grinding down an industry that relies on speed and volume. This approach also shifts the narrative of the war. Ukraine is no longer portrayed solely as a defender reacting to Russian aggression. It is increasingly seen as a strategic actor capable of projecting power far beyond its borders. That perception matters. It influences diplomatic discussions, military aid decisions, and global attitudes toward Russia's energy exports. When investors and governments begin to see Russian oil as unstable or risky, alternatives become more attractive. Perhaps most importantly, Ukraine's shadow fleet campaign exposes a deeper vulnerability in Russia's war model. Modern wars are not won only on the battlefield. They are won in supply chains, financial systems, and logistics networks. By targeting oil infrastructure at every stage, from drilling platforms to tankers at sea, Ukraine is attacking the war at its foundation. And this brings us to the final phase of the story. What happens if this strategy continues? How might Russia respond? And could this global energy campaign become the decisive factor that finally shifts the balance of the war? If Ukraine continues down this path, the implications for Russia are far more serious than the loss of a few tankers or oil platforms. What is unfolding is a slow-motion strangulation of the system that finances the war. Russia can absorb battlefield losses. It can mobilize more troops. It can even replace destroyed equipment. What it cannot easily replace is stable, predictable income on a global scale. And that is exactly what Ukraine is targeting. The shadow fleet was designed to be invisible, flexible, and immune to pressure. But invisibility disappears the moment fear enters the equation. Once crews hesitate, insurers retreat, and buyers demand discounts, the economics collapse. Oil trading depends on confidence and speed. When either one breaks, margins vanish. Russia is now being forced to sell its oil cheaper, move it slower, and protect it harder, all at the same time. That combination is unsustainable over the long term. There is also the question of escalation, which Moscow understands better than anyone. Retaliating openly against Ukrainian strikes on international shipping would risk pulling neutral countries into the conflict. Attacking vessels in return could disrupt global trade and isolate Russia further. Even threatening such actions could backfire, reinforcing the image of Russia as a destabilizing force in global markets. In this sense, Ukraine has maneuvered Russia into a strategic corner where every response carries consequences. At the same time, Ukraine's approach offers plausible deniability of its own. Many of these operations are not formally claimed. Details are released selectively. This ambiguity complicates diplomatic backlash and limits the ability of Russia to frame these attacks as acts of terrorism or piracy. Ukraine presents its actions as legitimate military operations against sanctioned assets funding an illegal invasion. Whether the world fully agrees or not, the lack of a clear red line has allowed these strikes to continue. What we are witnessing is a new model of warfare, one that blends intelligence, technology, economics, and psychological pressure. Drones replace destroyers. Covert launches replace naval fleets. Financial disruption replaces territorial conquest. Ukraine is fighting a global war without declaring one, targeting the systems that allow Russia to keep fighting at all. This strategy also reflects a deeper understanding of modern power. In a connected world, distance no longer guarantees safety. Sea lanes, once neutral highways of commerce, can become contested spaces overnight. Energy infrastructure, once protected by geography and diplomacy, is now exposed to actors willing to think creatively. Ukraine's campaign signals that no part of Russia's war machine exists in isolation anymore. For Russia, the warning is clear. Every tanker that leaves port may never return. Every platform that pumps oil could be next. Every assumption made in the early days of the invasion has been proven wrong. The war did not stay within Ukraine. It followed Russia into the seas, into its supply chains, and into the very networks that keep its economy alive. For the rest of the world, these events force uncomfortable questions. How long can energy markets remain insulated from conflict? How secure are global trade routes when even sanctioned fleets can become battlefields? And what happens when more nations adopt similar tactics, targeting economic lifelines instead of armies? Ukraine's answer is simple. As long as Russia uses oil money to fund destruction, those flows will be challenged wherever possible. The strike on Qendil-2 was not an isolated act of defiance. It was a declaration that the rules have changed. The oceans are no longer neutral. The shadow fleet is no longer hidden. And the war is no longer confined to one region. As this strategy expands, the pressure on Moscow will only increase. Not through dramatic announcements or sweeping offensives, but through quiet, relentless disruption. One tanker, one platform, one route at a time. History may look back on these moments not as side stories of the war, but as the turning point where Russia's financial engine finally began to stall. And this is why stories like this matter. Because wars are no longer fought only where bombs fall. They are fought in boardrooms, shipping lanes, insurance contracts, and energy markets. Understanding that shift is essential to understanding the future of global conflict. If you want to stay ahead of these changes, if you want deep analysis that goes beyond headlines and explains how power really moves in today's world, make sure you subscribe to Global Focus. Like the video, share it with others who want the full picture, and stay with us as we continue breaking down the strategies shaping this war and the world around it.